You're listening to Alcoholics Alive, where recovered members of Alcoholics Anonymous share their experience on how they live AA as a way of life. None of our participants get paid or speak for AA. Here are your hosts, Shank and Wayne. So Shank, we've been covering the promises, or the 9th step promises, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
We need to make sure that the listeners know that there's promises throughout the book.
How many?
Not just, I know some people that could tell you the answer to that, but I'm not going to go there.
Is it controversial? Is that why?
I don't think it's controversial. I don't know. Who actually sat down and went through the entire book and picked out all the promises?
I'm surprised you haven't.
Probably 2 of the Jeopardy players at Medoc.
Oh,
and I've not even gone and I already know who they are.
Look at the guest went in quick. It could have been, Sarah. That's a good point. But there are lots of promises in the book other than the ones that we are covering this season, just so you know. Probably one of the better promises is in the foreword of the first edition, where it says we've recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. That's a pretty big promise.
Doesn't it promise we'll drink again too?
Does it?
I guess
know. I don't know if it does or not. I think maybe if you stop doing certain things, it may imply that. We'll have to get our researchers, or maybe we can ask the ChatGPT chatbot if they know. Oh my goodness. Anyway, we've got a good guest with us. You've already heard her. She's already spoken up. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
And Shank, it's good to be here. My name's Sarah. I'm an alcoholic. Sobriety date, December 24th, 1988. Come from Durham. And we got to AA very young. I was introduced to AA by force in a group home, an adolescent transitional living center, forced to go to AA meetings, and got out of there and wasn't able to stay sober. Made a little bit of a connection with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous outside, but I didn't make it last, and wasn't quite ready to go to any lengths and to connect. Continued to drink for what I thought was going to be 10 more years, because I was 18. I was going to come back into AA when I was 28, and ended up being 3 months.
Wow.
And only made it that long, but trying to drink with a belly full of booze and a mind full of Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't mixing. And I was trying to prove the literature wrong and you all wrong. And the consequences of this timeout was alarming to see how bad things got before I could come back to the program. And a normal drinker would have, with those kind of consequences, would have come back, but they became consequences as serious as legal consequences and health consequences that were never going to go away. And so I made it to AA, crawling in Christmas Eve of 98, and just decided to give it 100%, because if it didn't work, nothing was. And so I've been able to stay here ever since, and grow up in Alcoholics Anonymous and conform to these principles and practice these steps in my life, and the one we're talking about today, and have these promises come true and have a brand new life given me because of what I found here. So that's my introduction.
So the goal was 10 years and you lasted 3 months. That's a quick crash and burn.
That was a quick turnaround there.
That's quick.
That's right.
That's some serious drinking there.
Didn't hang any longer.
My goodness. Well, we're glad you're here. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Shank, what's the topic?
Our topic today is fear of people. So if you're just tuning in, we are on episode 12 of this 4th season. We have gone through all of the previous promises in previous episodes, but we are now on the 10th promise, which is fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. This is a pretty bold claim, I think.
It sure is. Sarah, you got any experience with that?
I do have experience with that. Well, I think like I've always heard, these promises come true after having worked the first, after me having worked the first, 8 steps and get to the 9th step and have some changes occur, some looking inside occur, some admissions of defects, obviously preceded by all that surrender in the first 3 steps and first, second, and third, and turning my will and life over. And so a lot of changes happened before I got to this. And the fear of people and economic insecurity, the fear of people was most profound for me. I because of things that I had done in my life preceding alcoholism, and then even in my years of drinking, I was absolutely afraid to face the world, people from my past. I was the kind of person that wanted to cross the street. If I saw someone coming, I wanted to be on the other side of the street from anybody else that had had any interaction with me in the past. And so coming in and working these steps and making these amends, especially with my family, it allowed me to be a part of them again, to go to reunions and not feel like I was on the outside, to actually go to them in amends and talk about the wrongs I had done, and let them know what I was trying to do with my life, and ask them if there was anything that I could do to make my wrongs right to them. I remember the biggest profound fear of people had to do with, that was one of the biggest changes, I think, was with my family and my ability to really fit in my family again, and to belong and to participate. Economic insecurity. I was all of 18. I had done, my pride coming into Alcoholics Anonymous was that I was not a thief because I didn't steal. But I've learned now today that there's many, versions of being a thief. And so I was, but I made some financial amends. I didn't have a lot of creditors coming in. But because of the changes in the 6th and 7th step, I began to live differently and more responsibly. And so the economic insecurity from living right at that point, cleaning up the past and getting current and living right for me, I didn't create new chaos, and had just less the fear when I was not spending my money irresponsibly and dishonestly. So absolutely have some experience with that.
Well, the fear of people has plagued me for a long time. I struggled with that one for years, sober.
Yeah.
It was just kind of, come and go, and fear of economic insecurity. I probably would have told you I didn't have it, but I stole money for several years sober, and looking back on it, I stole money because I was afraid that I wasn't gonna be able to make it, or that I wasn't gonna have enough, or that I wasn't gonna have mine. And when I got some specific experience with that being gone, when I actually got honest about stealing and actually went and made a direct amends to an employer, and was willing to make that right, not long after that, whatever that fear was, it went away. And it's not come back. Fear of people. I mean, it kind of has come and gone for me. I struggled with that for years, but I'll tell you one experience I had. It just popped in my mind. I was sober 18 years, and this guy that I look up to, he's one of my heroes in Alcoholics Anonymous. We used to carry this message into a prison together. And one week we show up there, and he comes up to me. He says, "I need to talk to you." He's been sober way longer than I have. He says, "I know." He says, "I said some things to you last week, and it looked like it shook you and probably hurt you." And he says, "I just, want to tell you that I apologize for that." And I swear this is true. I had no clue what he was talking about. And it hit me that fear of what people think and worried about what, what I'm doing and who's watching, it was gone because I swear I had no idea what he was talking about. So whatever he thinks he did the week before, it didn't have any impact on me. And I finally realized that, man, I've kind of grown up in that area.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I couldn't tell you exactly something that I did to make that go away. It just, slowly over time, it kind of disappeared for me.
So since both of you all have been sober for quite some time, after this fear of people and of economic insecurity leaves you, will it return? I mean, I guess both of you all have kind of touched on that. Yes, it does. But what does that look like in your life? How were you able to clean it up from having done amends previously?
Well, I know that off of one of the most recent inventories that I've done, that was the highest, the biggest walk away from it was fear of what other people thought of me or looking good in other people's eyes. That was the biggest walk away I think I have from one of the most recent ones. And so it obviously has come back for me. But I was thinking about this, that the difference though is that it's not so much what I've done to them, because I don't tend to create as much damage and as chaos as I used to. But it's more futuristic and the what ifs and so that my fears have changed a lot. And so it's the navigation of those fears. I love the fear prayer, God, please remove my fear and direct my attention what you would have me be. What do I want to, how do I want to act? And I practice acting that about how I should be, as opposed to all my fears of the what ifs of what they're going to think of me and what I'm going to look like in their eyes. So I think a lot of six and seven step work has been good for me, practicing the opposite, practicing exactly what that fear prayer embodies about what would God have me be, looking at those ideals that emerge after having a fourth step, and I get to see, well, this is the ideal I'm practicing in the workplace and in the family and as a mother and as a member of the program. And so try to practice a lot of those with the fear of people. That's definitely one I've dealt with a lot. And then I'm talking about the economic insecurity, like it's returned as well. But it's all these great things that the program's put in my life now that now have a lot more to lose than I ever had. I had nothing when I came into the program. So I have a lot more to lose. But again, it's about principles and using spiritual principles to guide my actions and my spending. Not spending more than I make is a basic spiritual principle. Investing wisely and things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that if I'm doing a regular, I guess we would call it 10th and 11th step here on the podcast. If I'm staying current with people and trying to help other people and staying active in prayer, I think some of that stuff, it crops up, but it doesn't stay with me. So I may go into a new experience and be afraid of somebody or afraid of what they're going to think of me. But if I stay active in just simple actions of prayer and saying thy will be done, not mine, and talking to people with experience, it just doesn't dominate me or paralyze me like it used to. Shank, what does economic insecurity mean? I know we chatted a little bit about it before we recorded.
Well, I've always just thought that it was talking about wealth or about money, about, I grew up poor. So when I got sober, before I got sober too, I would always just try to pay for everything in cash, save up the money, whatever. Like I was so afraid to be in debt and things like that, which is not necessarily the worst thing. But after I got sober, I'm like, oh, fear of economic insecurity. Like, that's amazing. I just won't worry about it anymore. I won't worry about being rich or poor or any of that. And maybe that's true. But as I was looking it up before we were recording, it can also mean of or relating to the practical necessities of life. So it's not just, the fear of not having money. It's
Yeah.
also the fear of just not having basic practical necessities, whatever I view that I need to get by, whether it's love, attention, food, water, a place to live. Like, it's not necessarily just I'm going to have piles of cash everywhere. Like, I'm not going to be afraid that I'm not going to have that. That's what
Yeah.
I always thought.
I think most people probably think about just money when we talk about economic insecurity. I know I did for years. I just kind of associated with money and having enough money, but it's really fear of not having enough to survive and to get along. I think is if you really look at what the term economic means.
Well, and prior
Uh,
to even looking that up, I would have told you that, yeah, economic insecurity, no problem for me. Although I recently got a new car, and probably in the past, I don't know, 6, 7 weeks that I've had it, I'm like, I need to sell this. Like, this is ridiculous. I don't need this car. Like, I'll sell it. I'll just like go buy something for 2 grand, which it does touch on that. Just, am I going to be able to pay for these practical necessities of life because I have a nicer car now? Like that does go through my mind. So it's interesting that we're doing this today, giving kind
yeah,
of a new spin on it.
yeah, yeah. Well, we don't think we deserve anything good. You deserve the new car, Shank.
Oh, thanks so much.
Enjoy it.
Well, and for me, the fear of people, like I'm just the queen of overcorrection. So after I got sober and I was able to make all these amends to people I committed crimes against, to my family, to anyone that I had really been around in my drinking, I mean, it was just like overcorrected. Then for the past probably, I don't know, 5 to 7 years of my sobriety, I'm like, I don't care. I don't care. Like I had no fear whatsoever. Just didn't care. Like I'm gonna show up, do what I need to do, and that person doesn't like it. I don't care. I don't care what anyone thinks. Which is also like not the right attitude to
Right.
have.
Yeah. Yeah. That's to the extreme the wrong way.
Yeah. I've overcorrect. There were for sure 3 to 5 years of my sobriety where everything was an overcorrection in the opposite direction of probably what it needed to be. So
Yeah. Yep.
I was going to say one more thing about that amplified interpretation of economic insecurity. I'm a mother now. I've got these 2 kids, and I've navigated parenting and social circles around parenting. And one of the first things in this community where I live, when people introduce themselves, is they present their profession as well. And so I think that also, I've lost that fear of having to measure up to these other parents that at these play groups with our little toddler kids, we have to state what we do before we can get through the introductions. And so I don't have to be any more than I am. I'm okay as I am. So that's been a lot of the freedom that's come from working these steps, is being okay with just what I've come to the table with today.
Yeah.
So that was another thing when you talk about an amplified interpretation of that economic insecurity. Appreciate that.
Yeah. There's a lot of freedom in that.
A lot of freedom in that.
Yeah. Sarah, do you have a specific amends helped you overcome fear or economic insecurity?
Yeah, I did have one. I was still drinking. I got a great opportunity to be an apprentice at an oral surgeon's office. And I was so public about the way that I drank in my small town that I'm from, that I was seen in the wrong neighborhoods with the wrong people doing all kinds of mischief and ornery alcoholic things. And this employer let me go because he told me I was an embarrassment to his practice. And I was outraged about it, and it was just so resentful, and how I was so wronged by this. And so I came into Alcoholics Anonymous years later and had to revisit that, and I owed him an amend for not being a stellar employee and for other things. And it was one of those that there's a lot of controversy sometimes in rooms about, can I go to a person that I'm still angry at? And our book tells us clearly we can, but this was an example where I was still angry at this previous employer, and I went to him and made my amends like I was guided in the book. And then as a result of having made the amends, I received the gift of forgiveness towards that person. And so that's one particular amend that stands out. I was able to enter back into the world without fear of having any interaction with him or people that knew me from that stage. It was another way of rejoining life that they talk about in those promises. That making that amend allowed me to rejoin and take my place, and just solidify that I was a different person. I was a different woman, not the same woman who came in these rooms.
Yeah, very nice, very nice. Shank, let's move on to Battle of the Books.
Let's get ready to rumble!
All right. Our guest is
Sarah.
very excited about Battle of the Books. We're going to see what comes of this. Okay. So we are in step 10, round 10. Battle of the Books. This is our segment where we put a reading of the step. So this is step 10 from the big book versus the 12 by 12. And then we're going to vote. So the reading from the big book is from page 84. And it says, this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commence this way of living as we clean up the past. We have entered the world of the spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. It's a pretty serious reading. Okay.
That's
and
serious.
The 12 by 12, this is from page 93. It says, whenever we fail any of these people, we can promptly admit it. To ourselves always, and to them also, when the admission would be helpful. Courtesy, kindness, justice, and love are the keynotes by which we may come into harmony with practically anyone. When in doubt, we can always pause, saying, not my will, but thine be done. And we can often ask ourselves, am I doing to others as I would have them do to me today? What do y'all think?
Sarah, you gotta go first. What do you
So I'm embarrassed to say that this is one of those readings that for the 12 and 12 reading that jumps out at me like someone's been in that book writing since I've read it again. It is a phenomenal reading and I haven't read it in a long time. If ever before is what I'm getting. I'm getting the feeling. It's a great reading. I'm undecided. I've entered into this telling Wayne and Shank I'm undecided because they're both so good. Looking at that big book one, you know, I like the references. You know how the big book uses references to time and when things have to be done. So they talk about like we vigorously commence this way of living as we clean up the past. So it's something that I can go ahead and do as I'm cleaning up the past. I like those references to time. They say we discuss things with someone immediately. We make amends immediately and quickly if we've harmed anyone. So like a couple of references to time, how fast it has to be done. I love my guide. The guide that I've always used for a 10th step is look for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And they go and they repeat that like in the 11th step later. Like they'll repeat the same 4 things in the 11th step later and just add a couple more questions to it. But it's always kind of been the base of what I go to out of the big book, those 4 things when I'm doing inventory, daily inventory. I'm a particular fan of we discuss them with someone immediately. The 5th step makes reference to a solitary self-appraisal is insufficient. So like, then we compare it to like that 12 and 12 where they do say, you know, we promptly admit it to ourselves and then to them. And so I kind of like the 10th step out of the big book in this point where they say it has to be discussed with like a member of AA first prior to sometimes being discussed with the person. I like that suggestion of consult with another person beforehand. And then I always like both of them tend to turn us to resolutely look towards our thoughts, turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. I love the prayer that's put in at the end. One of the things that I try to, when we were talking about ideals earlier and what I'm trying to practice, like the fear prayer, what would God have me be? I love the courtesy, kindness, justice, and love being the keynotes of what can help me come into harmony. And I've heard some great talks before on like the 8th and the 9th step stuff. And one of the biggest things about the 8th step and the 9th step is like I was a creator of confusion rather than harmony. And so what the 8th and 9th step I think is allowing me to do is to be more of a creator of harmony. And I love that reference there. And the embodiment, both of them kind of embody like the St. Francis of Assisi prayer, where we talk about the understanding of what others are doing. And then if I understand better their case, I'm less likely to anger, to react, because I'm kind of understanding where they're coming from, why they might be acting that way. And then the biggest tool that my sponsees and I have been really focusing on in the last years has been the pause, the tool of the pause. I can always pause when agitated or doubtful. This little 12 and 12 reading makes reference to the pause. I love the pause. So I don't know what to talk about. I mean, it's got the dosing has so many great sides. So I'm split. I need to hear what your comments are.
Well,
I just have a question. How do we determine when the admission would be helpful?
Yeah, I was looking at that as well, Shank, on the 12 by 12 reading. It's almost like it gives us an out.
I should obviously be talking to someone else about this, right? So my sponsor or whomever is probably the one who would decide if the admission would be helpful.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just think that's interesting. I feel like the big book doesn't make references like that almost kind of give you a little bit of an out. Now, I'm sure somewhere in the big book there are those things, but similar to what Sarah said, I really do like in the big book how it talks about time. And it tells us when these crop up. It's not like, oh, you're a bad person and you haven't done your sobriety right if any of these things are going on in your life. I love that it says, hey, these are going to crop up. We ask God to remove them. All these references to time. And that's a good way to put it. We have action items and we have hey, we go and do this. So I really like that. I've never heard justice and love are the keynotes, which a keynote is a theme. I did look that up. And it tells me also, again, that we may come into harmony with practically anybody. So not everybody, but practically anybody. So if I'm not having those feelings towards someone, it's because it was practically anybody. And I still didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
That's kind of another out, like you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't have to make peace with that person.
Yeah. I will find the outs. 100%.
That's a good point.
If we all got justice, we'd probably be in a different place than we were right now. But
we'd be on a different timeline.
Yeah. I'll give the 12 by 12 credit for putting in here, not my will, but thine be done. I mean, that's straight out of the 10th and the 11th step. But even the pause in the big book, that's in step 11 mostly, where it talks about pausing. The 12 by 12's missing the point about talking to somebody else. So that's probably where it probably doesn't quite measure up to the big book. The big book reading gives very specific instructions on how to do a 10th step. And they're very easy to follow. And then it tells us what our code for life is. Love and tolerance. So,
well, and in the 12 by 12 also, it says, am I doing to others as I would have them do to me today? I don't know. I feel like I can twist that too. I would have people treat me really amazingly all the time. So if I'm going to treat you that way, okay, then I would have you treat me that way today. Is that happening? And then it's this expectation. That,
yeah.
Well, as long as I am loving, caring, tolerant, amazing, compliment someone's shoes and their outfit and their whatever, that I'm going to receive that. And when I don't, I'm going to be like, well, wait a minute. Am I not doing sobriety right? Am I not doing AA correctly?
Yeah, you get disappointed. Well,
What do you think?
I think I'm
Sarah?
ready to decide.
which one you going with, Sarah?
I'm going to go with the big book. Based on good points you guys made today. The outs, the kind of wiggle room, too much wiggle room in 12 and 12. I like that point made. So I'm going with the big book.
Okay.
Jay Wayne.
Shank, I'm going with the big book all the way on this one. How about you?
All right. That's a knockout for the big book.
Big book wins round
Step
10?
Round 10. The big book wins.
Shank,
All
did
right.
you decide which you picked?
I pick the big book almost every time, which is why I get Jerry to vote first. Yeah, I'm in for the big book.
All right. I just assumed you were, but yeah, we probably should check.
Yeah.
Good catch, Sarah.
Yeah,
So that's 3-0 on the big book this time.
it sure is. Step
All right.
10, straight out of the big book.
Straight out of the book. Sarah, we appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience with us.
Appreciate you having me. It was fun.
Yep, did a great job. Thanks for your experience and insight on the 9th step.
Mm-hmm.
So remember, if you're out there listening, if you take those first 9 steps, you can lose your fear of people and hopefully lose your fear of economic insecurity. And keep listening for more of Sarah's story.
I'm a member of the Primary Purpose Group in Durham. We meet on Tuesdays and Friday nights at 7:30. We're still hybrid because we're a family-friendly group, and so a lot of parents still need some of that hybrid access. So feel free to join in. We have our special 5th Friday. Fridays are our open meetings, and we have our 5th Friday event tomorrow that's going to be an AA Al-Anon speaker meeting because, again, we're trying to encompass that family aspect like conventions might do, where they try to involve the spouses or the family members or the children or things like that. So we would love to have you. We have our event tomorrow night at 7:30. My sobriety date's December 24th, 1998. And just a miracle that I'm standing before you today and that I have the life that I have today. That it ties completely to the topic of spiritual awakening and spiritual experience, because my first sponsor she was real fond of saying that, she's not the same woman that walked through these doors, in 98. And I'm not that same woman that walked through these doors. And what happened was the gift of Alcoholics Anonymous, manifesting through a spiritual awakening or a spiritual experience, has changed me into a completely different person. One of the ladies, I particularly love jails. I've put my application in, by the way, so for Wake County for daytime Wednesdays. I'm a mom, so I'm looking for services that I can do during the day while the kids are in school, and so I love jails. And one of the ladies that I went to the jail with. Back, recently, she said, Alcoholics Anonymous has given me the opportunity to live 2 lives in one. And I can assure you that I live each life to the fullest, each extreme. But that's what, having had a spiritual awakening or a spiritual experience as a result of practicing, working these steps, living these steps, practicing these steps over and over, year after year, I'm able to live a life that I never imagined was possible for me. And to kind of backtrack and tell you just a little bit about myself, I'm from Wilson, North Carolina. I'm from a great family. I didn't grow up seeing alcohol in my home. I have it in my family. Examples of it exist, but I discovered alcohol when I was about 13 or 14 years old, and I immediately loved the effect produced by alcohol. It did for me what I couldn't do for myself. And I pursued alcohol whenever, as much and as often as I could. From the very beginning, I don't understand anything about social drinking. I wanted oblivion. I wanted the ease and comfort that a drink gave me. I was, by the time I was 16, I had already been institutionalized one time. Psych wards were the first interventions for me. I had been introduced to, I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous when I was 16. And then by the time I was 17, I was in a long-term adolescent transitional living center for substance abuse, alcohol, substance abuse, and part of going to that program was having to go every day to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and get a sponsor from the outside and work the steps. And I lived at that facility a long time. And then I eventually transitioned to the outside, but I wasn't desperate, and I wasn't at that jumping off point, and I wasn't ready to adopt this program into my life yet. I did return to drinking. I'm sorry, I've been cheering for softball teams this week. If you see a van decorated out there, that's my daughter. They won district tournaments this week. So we're going on to state. So I think I've yelled a little bit, so my voice is failing me a little bit. I'm sorry. But by the time I was 17, I wasn't desperate, and I returned to drinking. Actually, I had to stay in that facility till I was 18. That was kind of part of the deal, is that my parents did a last effort to try to help me while they still had legal ability to help me. They had me institutionalized till I as long as they could keep me somewhere. So I finished high school in a long-term program, an alternative school. But the best thing that happened to me while I was there was that the seed of Alcoholics Anonymous was planted. So I did get out. I wasn't hopeless. I wasn't ready to adopt this program quite yet. I still wanted to have one foot in the old life and one foot in the new life. And so I rejoined my old acquaintances, but I had the attitude that I wasn't going to drink. I mean, it did make sense based on the evidence produced that I probably had a problem. I mean, I have been called an alcoholic as far back as I can remember. There was something very different from the way that I drank compared to the person beside me. And it was just noticeably more extreme. And I'm a person that intuitively knew that if a drink would work just as well on, if it would work on a Saturday night, it would work just as well on a Wednesday night. And it would work just as well on a Wednesday morning, And so, I took that morning drink long before I needed that morning drink. And a member of a previous home group says, if you take that morning drink before you need that morning drink, it won't be long before you need that morning drink. And so my drinking was extreme, and it was round the clock. I would just prefer not to be present. And so that's how I drank, and I returned to drinking after that long-term program, and after being effectively introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I returned to drinking with a head full of Alcoholics Anonymous and a body full of booze, and they were not mixing. And everything that they predicted would happen, the jails, the institutions, and then death, wasn't happening fast enough. Jails happen. I've been to jail. Institutions. I told you I've already been to institutions, and death. It just wasn't happening fast enough. I'm the kind of person that was going to die from a long-term, terminal illness, but little by little over the years. And so, anyway, I ended up the gift, that was to grow what was to grow into this time sober for me happened around. It kind of started happening around Christmas of '98. My sobriety date's Christmas Eve, and it's just an amazing gift every year to celebrate that, to be mindful of that for my parents, because I was, so young getting sober. I was 18 when I did end up coming in here and staying in here, and one of the things that Silkworth really honed in about. Now I'm connecting it to the topic. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell my story, but. One of the things Silkworth talks about is the absolute necessity of the person coming in the program to have experienced hopelessness. He talks about that over and over and over again, that in order for a person to come in and adopt this way of life and to do the things that are not necessarily comfortable or, feel very good to do, that person had to believe at some time that for them there was no hope. And I reached that point, and I've got chill bumps just telling you that. I remember that to this day. What it was like to be there. I reached this point of hopelessness that I truly believed that for me there would never be anything different for me, that this is the way that I was going to proceed for the rest of my life, and that I would never attain what I watched people attain, and do so naturally and do so easily. I mean, one of the clearest moments for me, I was an outdoor survivor. I grew up on farms. I'm not afraid to be outdoor. I'm not afraid to sleep outdoors. I'm not afraid to walk the streets. I'm not afraid to sleep in my car if I'm lucky enough to have a car. And I remember one of the moments that was just so clear to me, illustrating this hopelessness, was that I remember the sun coming up. It was not like some people who are sober and very, God-centered. What a beautiful moment and a beautiful experience. To me, it was so depressing to start another day. And I remember, if you guys know what I'm talking about, that the night is long, sometimes very cold, but the night is long, and then the world starts to wake up, and people start moving, and they start leaving their houses. And I remember that I would watch people leave their houses after I had been outdoors or up all night long, and I would watch people leave their houses. And I wondered how they did that. And I did not think I would ever be able to join that sector of the community. I watched them have families and have relationships, and just doubted I would ever be able to have something like that. How do they maintain those relationships and things like that? And so that's the hopelessness that I settled into and just kind of drug bottom, in 98, the fall of 98. And Christmas Eve's Eve was when magic happened for me, is that I reached a point where I was willing to come back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had some bad circumstances going on in my life with health, with legal problems. But I just came in this time and I said that I'm going to give it 100%. I'm going to do everything they suggest. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to at least know that I tried. And there's I won't have any reason to say why it didn't work for me. And so that was the approach that I came in to Alcoholics Anonymous with this time. And I stand before you today, many years later, a different woman that I am, having a different life, very different. And I stand before you today having all those things that I used to watch people have and wonder how they had those. They got those things and maintained those things. And I have all those things today. And even so much that I almost, this is not true. Like, if you get to know me real, it's not real. But I almost look so good from the outside that it's even hard for people where I came from to even recognize that I ever lived a life like that. And that's one of the descriptions that the appendix gives for spiritual awakening, spiritual experience. So that appendix that I make reference to is in the very back of the book, if you don't know, many of you know, and it describes spiritual awakening and spiritual experience. It's the original printing of the book gave the illusion that people had to have a sudden, spectacular upheaval, a spiritual experience. They tell us in that appendix that we can interchange spiritual awakening and spiritual experience. One other word that they use, Silkworth in particular used, he called it moral psychology. Like, some deep and effective change happened. And Silkworth noticed that when he studied all these patients prior to AA existing. He noticed that every once in a while something big would happen, and it would have the power to temporarily arrest a person's alcoholism. And I know I've had experiences like that in my story. I was a student of myself. I was baffled. I was frustrated with myself. Why do I do this over and over? Why do I end up in the same position over and over and over again? Why do I not learn from my mistakes? What's wrong with me? I was frustrated with my own self. But Silkworth talked about that every once in a while in my own story, I do identify with this, something might happen big that would scare me, that would move me spiritually or move me on some plane, and it would temporarily halt or pause my drinking. And the problem was that at that time, this was me prior to coming to AA, it didn't have lasting power. Just that one little experience was a nice little experience, but I wasn't at that time connected to any solution that would perpetuate, that would continue that spiritual experience that maybe was initiated by whatever big happened to me. And so the design of the 12 steps, as I've been explained, or I've been told, if we look at the wording of the 12 steps says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result, as the singular. Like, I'm a student of language. I speak another language. And so, it's the result, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, that if we look at the wording of that, that means that if I practice the first 11 steps, it'll create a spiritual awakening or a spiritual experience enough to continue and perpetuate. I had something good that got me stopped. It could be a jail, like a jail can stop me, temporarily, but something like big and some experience in my life could also stop me. But the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I got stopped, and the steps have been that thing that has changed me, that has created that ongoing educational variety that happens as contrary to what the book may have presented in the beginning, that it had to be some spectacular upheaval or sudden experience as a spiritual awakening. Mine has been the educational variety that has happened over time, the change of working these steps. I've worked the steps many times. I work the steps. I live the steps in my life. I practice this stuff. I love having sponsees because for me, that's one of the ways that this program continues itself, is that I try to do the same things that I do with my sponsees. I try to live by example. I try not to tell them to do anything that I'm not doing. And so sponsorship has really been another thing that's been able to keep this spiritual awakening, spiritual experience happening in my life. And so my favorite thing, too, is the preface of the 12 and 12, and it talks about, these steps are a set of principles, spiritual in nature. I don't quote things, by the way. I can't quote things word for word. I'm not going to do it perfectly, anything that I say tonight. But it's a set of principles, spiritual in nature, that if practiced as a way of life. Like that means I put my trash can out. This is an example from today. Our trash collectors want the trash can put out in a certain way. And I try to do that just to make their life easier because it's the right thing to do. And I'm doing something just to make something simple like that. I really try to be that good person as much and as often as I can. I try to do the right thing when people aren't looking. I'm practicing these principles. I practice spiritual principles. Sometimes you'll hear in AA, each step has a principle. I don't really kind of agree with that. I think that was something that treatment centers invented because it was a nice exercise that you could, practice it. But I think that there's so many principles, spiritual principles involved in every step, and that they overlap and that they repeat and so that's what I really try to do is I've tried to incorporate these principles into the way that I live, into the actions that I take, into my interactions with my family and with my children, with my patients, with my members of Alcoholics Anonymous, with my neighbors. Everywhere I go, I really try to do that. And what stands behind me, I think powering me, is just King Alcohol. I don't want to return to the way that I was. And I get spiritually unhealthy when I'm not connected, when I'm not actively perpetuating that spiritual awakening or spiritual experience. And so I'm getting close to winding down. I'm just going to tell you a couple little stories. One funny story was, kind of to tell you, I was living in that group home when I was still a teenager, and I had been introduced to AA. And I remember one time I thought I had to make myself have a spiritual experience. So I tried so hard, and I just wanted to have a white light experience or something. I mean, I've had blue light experiences, but I just wanted to have that. And I never did have that. And so if you haven't ever had something like that, do not be discouraged. I've had many, many neat experiences. What a spiritual awakening has ultimately, enabled me to do is to have a relationship. I've had a psychic change. I don't think the same way. It's changed the way that I think. It's changed the person that I am. It changes the way that I respond to situations that before I used to, adversely respond to. I'm just a different person entirely. But what it's also done, having a spiritual awakening and a spiritual experience, has slowed me down a lot. Many of you guys know me when I was young. I'm no longer young. So, it slowed me down. It's helped me be centered and present. When I'm slower and when I'm more present, I can hear the voice of God a lot of times. I don't hear a voice. I don't hear voices any longer. I have been in psych wards, by the way. So, but I can hear the message from my power greater than myself through the people around me. If I'm slow enough and centered enough, if I'm actively living those things, these principles and this way of life, I'm slow enough, I'm centered enough, I can hear the message that's sent to me. Like when we in the 11th step, when we ask for inspiration, we pause, when uncertain. We ask for inspiration, intuitive thought or decision. That's, to me, the epitome of living in a spiritual awakening and God consciousness. And so I never did have one, but I had an educational variety spiritual experience. And I've been able to stay sober, all these years off of my educational variety. So if you've never had a white light experience, there's hope for you yet. And the other thing, too, that they say that a lot of times other people will notice the change much sooner than we will ourselves. So that it was, and I had that same experience. When I got sober, I was, by the time I was 18 still, I was ready to sponsor. I was eligible based on the steps that I had worked to sponsor other ladies. And so my first sponsor told me that I dressed like a hooch and that no one was going to ask me to be their sponsor because of how I dressed and how I carried myself. And so none of the ladies that were coming into Alcoholics Anonymous were asking me to be their sponsor. So I had to go find women to be sponsees. And so prisons and jails have plenty of women that need sponsors, and so they took me. And so I got a lot of experience at young in sobriety. I got a lot of experience going into prisons. That was my thing. I'm from Wilson, North Carolina, and there was a women's prison in these years in Tarboro, North Carolina. And I would go there, and I would just basically spend time with ladies. And like I was never afraid. Those were my people. Like that's the world I come from. I may look like this today, but I'm not that person. And that you see in front of you. Like I am more comfortable in a jail carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous than I am in a dental continuing education course at UNC, which is my profession. Like I feel more at home and relaxed with those people there. And but I remember that I was taking ladies out. I wouldn't even get to take ladies out on pass and take them to outside meetings. And I remember one day I had a lady out on pass, and I had to stop in a store in a rough part of town for some reason, like a gas station. And someone hit behind it was one of the stores that I used to, when I ran the rougher neighborhoods, I think it was a sponsee that had gotten out of prison, and I was giving her rides after she had gotten out, and we stopped at this store for some reason. It was an old store that I used to buy from, and the guy behind the counter could not believe the person that I was. Like I was unrecognizable, and that's what our literature says, is to me the person was unrecognizable. And that's how I was. A lady that I used to, my running buddy, I was 18, she was 54. We drank the same, and her name was Duke Bug, and she was very good to me. She was like a little angel in disguise, even though she maybe was a bad influence in some ways. Like she was totally. Those of you who have run the streets, you know that those people exist that saved our butts, And I don't know what I would have done without her. I mean, I would have had so many other things happen to me if it hadn't been for her. But I remember she told me that too. She says, "I've never seen anyone change as fast as you changed." And when I had come, out of that lifestyle, I had gone back to the restaurant where we used to work for, and I saw her. We used to eat at that restaurant like we ate out tonight before the meeting, and she told me that. She says, "I've never seen anyone get out of that lifestyle and change as fast." And it was the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so, Alcoholics Anonymous has taken me out from the Roach Motels of 301 in Wilson, North Carolina, to, I've been able to go to college. I've been able to learn another language. I've been able to travel the world. I've been able to have a family. I have a marriage today, and I'm faithful to one person. To me, that is a spiritual awakening. Like, that is evidence of... I knew, that was a tool I had. I could work those men. And so, but to power that down it was just, oh my gosh, it was just to be the person that I am today, and to not damage my children, to be able to not continue this unfortunate chain of alcoholism, in my family for today. Who knows what they'll turn out to be like, but just to not be a part of that vicious cycle any longer. So that's all I've got.
Thanks for listening. If you have a comment, suggestion, or just need help, you can email Shank and Wayne at freedom@alcoholicsalive.com. Remember, we're recovered members of Alcoholics Anonymous, but we do not speak for Alcoholics Anonymous, nor do we get paid. Join us next week for another great episode.